New York Senate candidate Joe Pinion shares the impact of midterm election issues on New York and the nation by John Grimaldi. "It ain't over until the fat lady sings" is a commonly used idiom, a version of the old saying, "Don't count your chickens until they hatch." It might be an apt description of the New York State race for the U.S. Senate, in which conservative political commentator and candidate Joe Pinion is running. He is challenging the current Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer in the upcoming midterm elections. Although Schumer is ahead in the polls 54% to 42%, the state's Republican Party chief, Nick Langworthy, says Schumer is about to get a reality check. Joe was a guest on the Association of Mature American Citizens podcast, Better for America, recently and shared his thoughts on a range of rights, liberties, and issues with host and AMAC CEO, Rebecca Weber. He called the right to bear arms a God-given constitutional right to defend ourselves, to ensure that all the other amendments are safeguarded, to make sure that when the First Amendment breaks down and our respect for the rule of law breaks down, that people maintain their God-given right to defend themselves, defend their liberties, and, if necessary, defend themselves from a tyrannical government. He also emphasized the importance of protecting the veracity of all our amendments, of all of our constitutional rights at a time such as this, where we see the overreach of government more pervasive now than perhaps at any other time in the modern era, certainly in my lifetime. As regards the unchecked invasion of illegal immigrants, he said it has turned our southern border into the new Ellis Island, an island of doom and despair where children are now trafficked for sex in the name of this glorious nation, where we have now seen fentanyl become a leading cause of death for people age 18 to 45 because of this open border, a policy that they have rubber-stamped down there on our southern border. So again, there's a road of unintended consequences. Or in the case of some people on the left, failure by design. And that starts with one man, Charles Schumer. Pinion spoke on the lack of education the nation's children are receiving, calling education the civil rights issue of our time. 60% of all children are not reading at their education levels. If you want to drill down on a demographic basis, we have 65% of black and brown students in New York City that are not reading at grade level. This past week, we found out that 70% of the black students that took the AP state math exam failed. This is child abuse. We need to remind people that while Chuck Schumer pats himself on the back and calls himself a progressive champion, we now have public schools in New York City more segregated today than it was at the height of the Jim Crow era. A lack of educational opportunity drives entrenched poverty, and that entrenched poverty drives crime. And we cannot break this vicious cycle until we have a leadership that recognizes that these things are a problem. When you don't actually recognize that denying families choice and not giving parents access to the $18,000 per pupil that is earmarked for every single student on average that we have in this state is abusive and regressive, we are doomed to repeat this cycle time and time again. And the compound effect this has on vulnerable communities, on minority communities, leaves us all in a place where we now know that the America that was promised remains out of reach for the next generation. Pinion reminded us that Chuck Schumer comes from a long line of Democrats who want to give people exactly what they need to stay exactly where they are, which is well below what was promised in our founding documents. The solution to me is clear, that we need to have school choice as a right for every single family that calls this nation home. Whether you want to homeschool your child or send him or her to parochial school, those dollars need to follow the child. In the process, that would allow us to have more power over the curriculum that is being taught in those schools. Pinion's closing remarks focused on crime and the lack of accountability regarding criminals. He said, "There is no accountability in our laws anymore here in the state of New York, between the cashless bail that they passed and the defunding of the police before they restored the police budget back to previous levels. What has happened in that gulf is that we've seen officers resign en masse. We have seen communities overrun by criminals that should still be behind bars. People, criminals included, should always be given a pathway to redemption. But redemption requires people to acknowledge the pain that they have ushered into the world. If they have not actually made that commitment to change, then a second chance is actually weaponizing our own compassion at the expense of those who have done nothing wrong." To remind us how to prepare for November 8th, Joe tells listeners that we must plant our feet firmly, we must stand up for our freedoms and our liberties because our freedoms are on the ballot, and, as Reagan told us, they are not passed down in your bloodstream. We must fight for them. Please consider joining the Association of Mature American Citizens. Please take a moment and subscribe to this channel.